Mr. Seckin, author and creator of the project To the Gulag, they're with us on the line. Vladimir, greetings. Greetings, Vadim, and greetings to our dear viewers and subscribers. Good afternoon, everyone. But I want to say that thanks to Vladimir, we will know many things that are happening in Russia, and the viewers of our channel will know much earlier than it becomes public, including about the large-scale leak of documents on nuclear secrets of the Russian Federation. Today it was announced that about 2 million documents fell, as the Kremlin would say, into the wrong hands. But apparently into the wrong hands. You told us about this about 8 or 9 months ago, when you detained Timur Ivanov. Today it has become the property of the general public. Here we can talk about this in more detail. How quickly time passes. In fact, it's been about a year. It's been a year. But I understand that, given the dynamics, it seems that less. For Timur Ivanov, what interrupts? For Timur Ivanov, time is just now dragging on more slowly. Well, no, it's like yes. Everything is sad for him. But if we go back to the leak of nuclear secrets, in fact, all this happened much earlier even. Then we talked about it openly on the air. Starting from the 22nd, 23rd year, there was a split within the Putin system, and a fairly large number of those people who were somehow involved in the 12th main directorate of the Ministry of Defense, the so-called GUMO. This is what is responsible for the storage of nuclear weapons of the strategic missile forces, respectively. Contractors, subcontractors, those who work in the Orpheation in Nizhny Novgorod and produce the same nuclear weapons, are working on promising models such as the Petrel. All this, starting from the 22nd year, of course, began to flow out, leak out, fly away from Russia at a rapid speed. A large number of those who worked for the Russian nuclear industry, they really believed until the 22nd year that they were creating a shield for defense, for protection. But what happened after the beginning of this open war, the attack on Ukraine? A huge number of those people who were inside the system, they generally realized that they were creating poverty. They were creating a spear to attack. But that's another story. Trust Putin, the dictator with nuclear weapons with which he can destroy countries and peoples. No, of course. Many have started to come out of this and somehow transmit to the West, go out themselves, transmit to the West, leak some information. And those who were responsible for the preservation of these nuclear secrets, respectively, yes. Among them, there are those who have a portrait of Dzerzhinsky hanging on the wall, and occupies a much larger place than the portraits of Putin, Bortnikov, and so on. And there are those people who are frankly disappointed, especially after what the FS has to take part in the occupied territories. This is filtering. This is the distribution of the conveyor of torture already against Ukrainians. If they had used this cudgel against criminals or those who, as they thought, wants to shift the power, now they are used against people who are in the country, on its territory, and just don't want to be with a mop in one place, and worship of Putin. And this, of course, broke the entire state security system. Few people are talking about this today. Everyone thinks that everything has been preserved as it was before the war. No, there are a lot of holes, a lot of cracks, and the entire state security system today is such a colander. And more than Putin has brought Russia, and that the KGB didn't hurt no foreign agent, spy, CIA, Spousenet, Hurwitz, and so on. It was Putin who demotivated a huge number of people inside the system, and vice versa, motivated them to either leave, or at least, even we know facts there, a number of facts when people continue to be inside the system, but they allow these leaks. Someone contacts through the Tor with the well-known Telegram channel of the CIA and then goes there on the network in closed chats and transmits information. Someone sends this information directly to journalists, and someone just takes, and it's all in the open publishes through e-procurement system. As a matter of fact, what are these publications of Der Spiegel and several other German publications about right now? And the only thing I would like to note after all is that it coincided, or maybe it didn't coincide, maybe it wasn't even a coincidence, but a joint such action. Arrival of the President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, in Germany, meeting with the government, with Chancellor Merz, and with the entire German government as a sign of solidarity. The decisive actions of the German leadership to support Ukraine, and at the same time, German journalists. German media publish quite sensational material in general, which clearly shows that Vladimir Putin has no secrets. There are no secrets from military counterintelligence. Everything is known. The only question is that if Putin crosses the double solid red line here, it is quite possible that everything will be much sadder. Then the Kremlin can draw for itself. In general, all their secrets is definitely not a secret. The fact that they are now putting someone in jail for disclosing some state secrets and so on is rather an imitation of violent activity when they have already lost everything. Everything has already flowed away from them. In particular, there were several waves. As I have already said, for the 22nd or 23rd year, we recorded really waves of those people who left with documents firm inside the system. And the 24th year, it was already the collapse of the Shoigu-Selikovivanov system, and, accordingly, subcontractors who had already taken out a huge array of documents began to leave. Well, plus everything else, it is superimposed on the fact that inside the system, there were those people who let go of the reins, and who began to publish in open access. Almost all tenders, all tender documentation for a huge number of objects of the 12th Gumoa. That's it. There is no de facto military secrecy in Russia. The only mystery that they have left, they maintain, is that it is a colossus with feet of clay. So they are still puffing out their cheeks. The king is naked, in fact. Will there be any resignations, any consequences? But still a leak. Even if there are no secrets already, in the image sense, it's still a big problem. Leaked info about the seemingly protect this segment of the Russian military complex on the nuclear triad. If there was a real statesman at the helm in Russia, who, at least, he may not be a liberal, not a Democrat, he may not even fantasize or dream of a beautiful Russia of the future, but a person who thinks at least about preserving his country and strategic secrets, but probably it would have been done. And taking into account the fact that a thief is at the helm, a man who, together with his gang, is with this junta, is defrauding the budget of the Russian Federation. Such temporary workers who want to steal as much as possible. Of course, they themselves will not live to see the moment when these capitals will be spent, but their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will spend it all in casinos in Monte Carlo, in Paris, in Milan, in London. Here in Biarritz, they will buy a few more pitchforks for themselves, and so on. And there isn't. Once again, Putin allowed the complete collapse of this state security system. And those people who are inside, why is discontent brewing? Why is he forced to adopt repressive laws all the time and regularly imprison even his security forces, keep them at bay? Because he understands that very serious events are brewing, and very serious discontent at the level of even the generals, not to mention the grassroots, about what is happening in the united group of troops in the occupied territories. Well, by the way, about the grassroots, if you can use this wording, let's say not the elites. Today, a video appeared in which the widow of one of the victims, as it is called in the Kremlin, is not well. But let's call things by their proper names. This is an occupation war of aggression. The widow addressed in her video, with such you will be torn, she said, addressing Vladimir Putin. And these voices are starting to sound from the grassroots, just from people who are there next to the front or at the front. Is this a lonely voice crying out in the desert, or is it already starting to build into a certain trend? There are cracks. We can see how the streams are going now. At some certain point, the dam will burst and collapse. A huge number of people died because of him and the Ukraine from Russia. The war, of course, is for Russia an occupation, vile, meaningless. No NATO threatens the Russian Federation. Otherwise, they would have reached Moscow long ago and supported, including in June of the 23rd year, the armed rebellion of Prigozhin. No, of course, people are gradually seeing the light. Yes, someone can, like General Popov, be put in prison, in a cell, discredited, stripped of titles, called scammers. In general, he has been doing this for the last more than 10 years with respect to all opponents. Heroizes his beloved, tries to extinguish everyone else. But, of course, it has already accumulated a critical mass. The only question is when this one, from the cauldron of all this firmly occupied territories, will spill back into Russia. What I know now is what we will publish in the coming days. But it is obvious that something broke inside the system. In other words, I can record that over the past month, we have been contacted by more of those who are their so-called Sochi, arbitrarily leaving parts of those people who are inside the system. We have been contacted over the past month, as many as have not been contacted over the past year. It's all reminiscent of the events of September 2022 year. Why is this happening? We are still not clear. I can't explain it. But apparently, something inside has broken, and there is some kind of internal collapse of the system. The explosion in Stavropol killed a veteran of the so-called participant of the time of Heroes program, Zor Cucumbers. The database writes that 29-year-old Nikita Penkov approached an official in the courtyard of a house on Chekhov Street and triggered an explosive device. It is indicated here that Zor Obertsev participated in the command in the air operation in Mariupol and then passed the time of Heroes program and became an official. Is something known about this? No, not yet, of course. This apparently all happened only in hot pursuit, but there will be more and more such emergencies. Here, everything will be on the rise. The negative that Putin's army sowed in Ukraine, it will, of course, boomerang back. There are no illusions on this topic. Imitation of negotiations, or maybe not imitation of negotiations. Istanbul again, Medinsky again, Lavrov again, Trump again. It feels like we're running in a vicious circle. But like in the movie Groundhog Day, it is possible that changes each time, and there's a definite ending. Outside of the groundhog, you need to get better, and then everything will return to normal. Is that what we are seeing now in this sense? What thoughts do you have about the future? Time is running. Time is working against Putin. Time works against his regime inexorably. Despite the fact that they actually hoped to win a pause with these negotiations. We have seen with you how Kursk is blown up, how Russia is losing its arsenals one by one. The main directorate of the General Staff, they directly told the dictator that everything would end soon, there would be nothing to attack with. They needed to make up for it all. That's why these curtsies, dancing with a tambourine, and imitation of violent activity began, where Putin lied in plain text, deceived Trump, and they needed to replenish resources to continue so for the offensive. Plus, as I have already said, this was actively used by the family of version 2.0. They tried to go beyond the flags, tried to enlist the support of the American side to get a partnership. This dualism, as I have said many times, is peculiar to Russia. Yes, look at the coat of arms, and everything will become clear. One country wants to work with the West, the other looks to the East, and continues to connect and work with them. No, I think that in a certain period of time in the coming week, we will see dramatic changes in the position of Donald Trump, in the position of the US presidential administration as a whole, and the State Department, and the Pentagon as well.
и Пентагона в том числе. И,
Of course,
конечно
the
же,
Germans are pedantic,
немцы — это
very
педантичные,
intelligent
очень
people.
умные люди,
And
и
Merz,
Мерц,
who
который
leads
возглавляет
Germany
Германию
today,
сегодня,
he is
он же
not
не
just
просто
voicing
так
the lifting of restrictions
озвучивает
on deep strikes and investments
и
in Ukraine,
снятие
and the
ограничений на
construction of
удары
missiles
вглубь,
and so
и
on.
инвестиции в Украину, и в строительство ракет и так далее.
Patience is
Терпение
complete.
завершено.
They
Они все
understood
поняли.
everything. Putin
Путин —
is a
это
gopnik.
гопник. В
At some
какой-то момент
point,
он
he
пытался, уж
tried,
извините за это
excuse me
выражение,
for this
взять на понт
expression, to take
всех.
on everyone, but
А
nothing
ничего не
happened.
получилось, никто
No
его
one
уже
is
не
afraid of him
боится.
anymore. Putin
Путин до
does
конца
not
не понимает,
understand how the
насколько
West today is reading it
Запад
controls
сегодня
what happens in Russia, including
читает
in the
его,
defense ministry,
контролирует то,
including
что
the
происходит в России,
FSO.
в том числе в Минобороне, в том числе в ФСБ, ФСО.
Just at
Просто в
some
какой-то
certain
определенный
point,
момент
but more decisive actions will begin.
начнутся более решительные действия.
And
А
China,
Китай, на который
which
так сильно
Putin is
рассчитывает
counting on so much,
Путин,
China will take
Китай
a
возьмет
pause
паузу
and
и
suddenly
станет для
become a
него вдруг
subscriber for
абонентный
him,
абонент, потому
because
что для
for China,
Китая и Европа,
both
и
Europe
США —
and the
это
United
гораздо
States
более
are much more
стратегические
strategic
партнеры
partners and
и
buyers
покупатели
of
китайских
Chinese goods
товаров,
than
нежели
Russia.
Россия.
Russia
Россия —
is a
это
supplier of
поставщик
cheap resources.
дешевых ресурсов.
Today, he
Сегодня
is
он
buying
скупает по
everything from
дешевке все
Putin
у
on the cheap.
Путина.
After
Через
some
какое-то
time,
время
to buy it
будет
is not
скупать это
Putin,
не у Путина,
but the
а
one
у
who
того,
will
кто
replace
придет ему
him.
на смену.
But at the same time,
В то же
the
время
Russian army is
российская
launching
армия
an
начинает
offensive.
наступление.
This has already been reported by Western sources of OSECHKIN, analysts, media, and the New York Times. In other words, Putin is moving forward, and there are data, according to which the progress has intensified and accelerated. In other words, the Russian army is seizing quite large areas now. At
Какой
what cost?
ценой?
In fact,
На самом деле
Putin is
Путин
not
никуда не
going
идет
anywhere
вперед.
forward.
Путин продолжает
Putin continues
греть
to warm his
свое
soft
мягкое
seat in
место в
armchairs,
креслах,
in
в
comfortable chairs with
комфортных креслах с
ventilation, with
вентиляцией, с
heating,
подогревами, с
with
массажами
massages in the
в
Kremlin
Кремле
and
и
in the
в
village
деревне
of
Усово, в
Yusovo in
Новоогарево, под
Novogarevo in the
Москвой.
Moscow region.
Вперед
Forward to
на
zero,
ноль, туда
former
на
prisoners,
передовую
contract
отправляются
workers
бывшие
are
зэки
sent to the
заключенные,
front line there.
контрактники,
Now the
сейчас и
mobilized will be
мобилизованных
dragged
будут
into all this.
втягивать во все это.
But the
Но то,
fact
что он
that he is
сейчас
now treacherously
вероломным
spending human
образом
lives.
расходует человеческие жизни,
Once
еще раз,
again, there have never
никогда
been
не
so many
было
fleeing from the
такого
Russian army
количества
as there have
бегущих из
been
российской
recently.
армии, как вот в
I
последнее время. Я не
accidentally said
случайно
this 10
сказал
or
минут
15 minutes
10-15
ago
назад, что
that a huge
огромное
number of
количество
people
людей к
drawn
нам
to
тоже
us too.
обращается.
Now, in the very
Сейчас
near
в самое
future,
ближайшее
and on the
время и на
Gulag
канале
channel,
ГУЛАГу нет, мы
no, we
опубликуем.
will
Я думаю,
publish it.
что и другие
And I
медиа
think that other
это
media will pick it
все
up,
подхватят,
and a
и к ним
huge
тоже
number
будут
of people will
обращаться.
also turn to
Огромное
them.
количество.
The
Начался
exodus
исход.
has begun.
Потому
Because
что
they are
они
absolutely
пользуются
treacherous
абсолютно
methods.
вероломными
They don't take
методами,
care
они
of
не
people.
берегут людей,
They
они
drive under
гонят
drones for
под
slaughter.
дроны на убой.
I'm not
Я
talking
сейчас
about
не про
history now.
историю, там
There
наши
are our
мальчики и
boys
так
and so
далее.
on.
Вопрос
The
просто
question is
по-человечески.
simply human.
Его
His
армия
army
начинает
is beginning
понимать,
to realize
что
that he
он
really
их
does not regard them as
действительно,
cannon
так
fodder,
же, как и
as mine
Пригожин с
meat,
Уткиным,
in the same way
расценивает
as
как пушечное,
Prigozhin
как
and
минное
Utkin.
мясо.
There is a
Идет
huge
огромный
expenditure
расход
of human
человеческих
lives.
жизней.
Apu, in this
ВСУ в данном
case,
случае,
if they are
если они
delayed,
оттягиваются,
they
они
just
просто
take care
берегут
of their
своих.
own.
Потому что
Because
людей
people
в
in
Украине
Ukraine less
меньше,
than in
чем
Russia,
в России.
and
И
the attitude
отношение
is
совсем
completely
другое.
different for a second.
На секундочку.
Putin
Путин
pushes and
продавливает
pushes
и
forward
продвигает
together
вперед
with the
вместе
general
с
staff of the
Генштабом
troops,
войска
at the
ценой
cost of daily losses of hundreds and thousands of
ежесуточных
human
потерь
lives.
сотен и тысяч человеческих жизней.
And I'm sure that not
Я
only
уверен,
will the
что со
International
временем
Criminal Court in The Hague
не только
will not
будет
only created the
Международный
tribunal,
уголовный суд в Гааге, не только будет созданный трибунал.
I am
Я
sure
уверен, что и
that
на
both at the
национальном
national
уровне в
level in
России
Russia and
и
Putin, and well,
Путина,
he
и
probably will
он
not
не
live
доживет,
here,
но
but
его
we will
ближайшее
definitely
окружение
judge his
точно
inner circle
мы все
for
будем
what he has
судить
done in
за то, что
relation
он
to the
сотворил
Russians
в отношении
themselves.
самих россиян.
Well, thank you. Vladimir
Ну что ж,
OSECHKIN, author and creator of the Gulag Project. No, he was in direct contact with us. Thank you, and see you next time. Have a nice day. Thank you. Have a good day and a peaceful sky over your head. Goodbye.
Мы продолжаем.